Jimmy Greaves was almost as gifted a storyteller as he was a footballer. His wife Irene will tell you that, when his 10 grandchildren were young, he'd spin them all sorts of yarns. Tottenham and Chelsea legend Jimmy Greaves is among the greatest players England has produced. Grandad was once a cowboy who fought at the Alamo, he'd tell them, or, Grandad was an astronaut who flew a rocket ship to the moon. The grandkids would lap it up, nodding their heads, eyes wide, mouths agog. The problem was, when they got a little older and were told that their granddad had been by far and away the greatest goal scorer England had ever seen, they struggled to believe it. That was the story he never told them, one they gradually pieced together for themselves. This week there's a new biography out, Natural, The Jimmy Greaves Story, by David Tossell, and it is a tale well worth telling. The book arrives just as Tottenham finally move into their new stadium tomorrow night, and that's a happy coincidence for the publishers, given that nobody could possibly have planned it that way. Greaves is by a distance Spurs' all-time leading scorer with 266 goals, yet his scoring ratio was even more prolific before that, in a Chelsea team he often described as crap. We often talk as if English football was invented in 1992 when the Premier League started. Greaves with his wife Irene at a London restaurant in 1965, but while Alan Shearer is out on his own with 260 goals in the modern era, Greaves netted a staggering 357 times in English top-flight football, despite retiring aged 31. Until 2 years ago he was the leading all-time scorer in the history of Europe's top 5 leagues. 2 men have overtaken Greaves since then, Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi. As a goal scorer, they are his only peers. But that isn't even half the story. Greaves' rich tapestry involves an ill-fated move to AC Milan, missing out on the 1966 World Cup final through injury and being bombed by Tottenham after 4 top-flight golden boots in 8 seasons. Then came Around the World Rally, a descent into alcoholism, and Greaves' triumphant reinvention as one of the nation's best-loved TV presenters. Greaves has put his name to 6 ghost-written autobiographies, for various slants and standards. But as Tossell correctly says, self-analysis, and certainly self-praise, are not among the man's many qualities. He always insisted that he had no idea how he was quite so good at what he did. This week's Maverick Monday is Chelsea and Spurs star Jimmy Greaves. That title, Natural, sums him up as a footballer and a talker. I had the ridiculously great privilege of ghostwriting Jim's newspaper column, which meant that for 5 years, I'd spend about an hour and a half each week on the phone with him. The column took 20 minutes, the rest was just shooting the breeze with one of the warmest, funniest and most engaging people you could ever meet. And all the while enriching my love of football with his first-hand accounts of so many greats, from Pelé to Lev Yashin, from George Best to Bobby Moore and Stanley Matthews, names from history books described as flesh and blood mates. It is fair to say Jim was always much better at analyzing human beings than football matches. In his book, Tossell tells us how Greaves was identified for a TV career thanks to a 1980 documentary, Just for Today, during which he spoke to camera, at length and with great clarity, about his battle with alcoholism. That would have been during his 2nd year on the wagon. More than 30 sober years later, he was telling me that the disease was still as real a part of his daily life as a one-legged man having to screw a prosthetic limb on each morning. Stats: Chelsea, 1957–1961, 169 appearances, 132 goals. AC Milan, 1961, 14 apps, 9 goals. Tottenham Hotspur, 1961–1970, 381 apps, 266 goals. West Ham, 1970–1971, 40 apps, 13 goals. England, 1959–1967, 57 caps, 40 goals. Honours: Serie A, 1962 FA Cup, 1962, 1967 European Cup Winners' Cup, 1963 World Cup, 1966. Thankfully, of late, it is becoming ever more common for men to discuss their struggles with addiction. 40 years ago, it was extremely rare. Greaves's honesty would have had a huge impact on many in an age of just 3 TV channels and countless emotionally repressed men struggling to cope with their own drinking. It was little wonder he'd become so well loved over the next 15 years, especially for the Saint. I've been banging of years about the scandal of Greaves never having been recognized in Britain's honours system. And the release of Tossel's book just a week after Greaves's great successor as Tottenham's goal machine, Harry Kane, received an MBE, has brought welcome extra volume to that argument. His son Danny admitted this week, any such gong would almost be too late for the man himself. Greaves suffered a devastating stroke almost 5 years ago which robbed him of his mobility, and much of his personality. Now aged 79, his great human qualities are dimmed, though not completely lost. He still understands but finds conversation difficult. He will know Tottenham are moving into a new stadium, and despite his many years of sadness about their decision to sell him in 1970, he'll doubtless wish them well when the new stadium is named and they start to christen parts of it after former greats. Jimmy Greaves will surely be at the top of the list. The best years of his life are gone now, but what a life, what a footballer, and what an absolute diamond of a bloke. Natural, the Jimmy Greaves story is out now, published by Pitch Publishing Limited, priced £19.99. Greaves had an incredible record for Chelsea, scoring 132 goals in 169 matches. Greaves scoring his 200th Spurs goal past England legend Gordon Banks. The striker scored a club record 266 for Tottenham. Greaves scored 44 goals in 57 matches for England, the fourth highest total. Harry Kane, who was awarded an MBE last week, pictured with a Greaves in 2018 glove affair when Loris Karius chucked in 2 goals during last season's Champions League final. The goalkeeping union certainly owed Liverpool. And if the Reds are this season crowned champions of England for the first time in 29 years, they can thank comrades Jordan Pickford, Julian Speroni, Sergio Rico and Hugo Lloris for the extraordinary gaffes which have handed them a total of 8 points. Selling his soul, Maurizio Sarri got away with it at Cardiff on Sunday, but the joyless Italian has been negligent in his dealings with Callum Hudson-Odoi. Sarri isn't daft, and he knows he's going to infuriate Chelsea's supporters every time he snubs the thrilling young England winger. The Blues boss is the anti-Solskjaer. It's almost as if he's after a payoff. FA wide of Mark Bullingham may well be an excellent choice as the new FA chief executive. Like most people, I'd never heard of him until his appointment was announced last week. But how refreshing it would have been to see one of our legion of intelligent, business-savvy former players bringing their own footballing perspective to that job.